Tēnā koutou katoa, Atamarie, and welcome to today's online hui held by PANNZ and Auckland Live. Thank you so much to all of you who are joining us this morning. I'm really looking forward to the conversations we're going to have today. Got a wonderful group of panelists, including Borni Te Rongopai Tukiwaho, Shona McCullough, and Renee Liang. Thanks to all of you who are tuning in on Facebook Live and YouTube. Welcome to this wonderful opportunity to gather as an industry and to talk, kōrero, discuss, and hear some thoughts from people who are working within our arts sector. I'd like to start today's session with a karakia, me inoi tātou. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa I roto, tūtawa I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, Haumie, huie, taiki. Kia ora anō and welcome. Thank you again to all of you who are tuned in today. We're really looking forward to today's conversation. It is a conversation with all of you. So on YouTube and Facebook Live, please, if you have any thoughts or questions during today's panel, just enter your thoughts into the comments, and we've got a team here behind the scenes who will be feeding those questions through to us so that we can answer them during our panel. How the panel will work this morning, as per our other panels, is that our panelists will speak first, and then at the end we'll take the opportunity to have a discussion and take your questions together. So today is a big day. Today we're expecting to hear from the government at 4 o'clock whether or not we'll be moving out of the lockdown. We've been here all together in our bubbles for almost 4 weeks now, and we do recognise the impact that this has had on many of us as individuals and our whānau, and of course our businesses and the way that we're able to operate in the arts. So we're paused for another transition. So today we wanted to have a conversation and a kōrero about hauora and well-being, our mental, physical, spiritual well-being, and how we're paused to move forward as a sector, as individuals, as communities, as companies, as artists, and as a whole sector. So I'm very excited today to be joined on the panel by Borni Te Rongopai Tukiwaho, who is the director of the Auckland Fringe Festival and Taurima Vibes Limited, and an advocate and an arts worker who's working within the realms of arts and health. We're welcoming Shona McCullough, who's the artistic director of the Auckland Arts Festival, was the founding artistic director of the New Zealand Dance Company, and a creative entrepreneur with much experience as a performer, as a choreographer, an artist, and a change maker. And finally, our panelists today, wonderful to have you here, Renee Liang, who is a writer, a community theatre maker, and a paediatrician and medical researcher. So first of all, I would like us to buckle in, and we're going to hear from our first panelist today. I'll just share a little bit more about Borni for those of you who may not know him. Borni is the kaiwhakahaere of Taurima Vibes Limited. He's the director of the Auckland Fringe Festival and a member of health promotion agencies, and is on the National Māori Mental Health Advisory. Taurima Vibes is a brokership entity functioning between the arts and health sectors to help build tangible bridging opportunities, networks, and tools for artists. They work to combat stigmas, negative social perceptions of lived experiences within our community by uplifting and unifying. Kia ora, Borni, welcome. Over to you.
Kia ora e wā. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ko Borni Te Rongopai Tukiwaho tōku inga. Ko maunga pohatu te maunga, ko ohene mataroa te awa. Ko mātātua te waka, ko Tuhoe te iwi, ko Ngāti Raukawa te hapu, ko Taitai a hape te marae. Kei te kaiwhakahaere, Taurima Vibes, o te ahurei mōhu o Tamaki Makaurau inai. Atamarie. Kia ora no everyone. I'll keep myself brief. Before I say anything else, the first thing I'd like to do is to pay respects to PANNZ and Auckland Live, Helena, Francis, Heather, Louise behind the cameras today, and also to acknowledge my friends here, Dolina, Renee, and Shona, Morena whānau. For me, today is it's one of those really interesting things. It's our fourth week. We're going through lots of different negotiations, and if we forecast what it means past today as well, that's not going to change. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of the knowledge that Renee is able to bring around all of those questions that we have from that medical point of view. And, we have the wisdom of Shona, who's been a part of our industry for years, so is able to bring both of those. And for me, I feel the function that I have as a support space within our sector is to kind of, if anyone has any questions, obviously answer those. But just to speak to what does support mean for our hauora within the specificity that we have within our sector. I think I'll leave it there. Back to you, Dolina. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, Borni. Before we move on to our next panelist, I just wanted to thank you for your mahi that you've been doing on the social media space in terms of sharing a lot of the resources that you have from the Mental Health Organisation in terms of how we can keep our well-being. Would you mind sharing or speaking a little bit about where people could go to access some of those resources?
Ka pai. Yeah, so I guess I spoke about function just before, and I realized really quickly that one of the functions that I had, and one of the tools that I was able to gift as soon as we started to begin this lockdown, was I can navigate between our art space and, when we speak of hauora, specifically that mental health space. A lot of the irrational stuff comes from how reactionary we are at the very beginning, and all of those anxieties are fueled by those reactions and the fears of the uncertainty. And so what I was able to do was literally hunker down and research. There's a lot of resources that are really well available to us, like the Mental Health Foundation. There's actually a lot of wellness, not apps, what you call them, pages on Facebook as well. Like there's a Vision of Hope. All of the main spaces like Changing Minds, they all have places that you can find. But I would suggest, if you have specificity of that you need to look at, I would figure out where are the legitimate places to go. So I think I would start with the Mental Health Foundation. I would start looking at the Health Promotion Agency. Now, for those who don't know what that is, the Health Promotion Agency sits alongside the DHB. And what they do is literally that. They promote health. They promote the depression.orgs, not the smoke-free, alcohol-free, all of those spaces. Now, if you go there, you know that you're going to get legitimate, and what I mean by legitimate, it's going to be researched. There's going to be something there for everybody. And they will then let you know on their websites where other places can go, where other places are that you can connect to. Another way to do that is just hit us up on our Facebook pages. There's what's that big Facebook forum we have now that starts with AA? It's a really long name. I can't remember. But there's, just hit us up on those, and I'm actually navigating those spaces more on Mana Moana is another space that we have on there, but I'm navigating that area, and if questions start popping up, then I'm able to look at what those are. I might have friends across the spaces. If people are searching and they can't find answers, then I'm happy to try and figure out what I can do to help as well.
Kia ora, thank you, Borni. Also on the PANNZ website, PANNZ has been gathering lots of different resources, and I think that potentially some of those things and resources or websites and apps that you've talked about are already included on that page, or I'm sure that PANNZ will be updating that page regularly. I think for many of us within the arts sector, it was a huge change. I know in the first week, certainly people were being very careful about the new normal, the working from home, how to navigate the ideas of their work drying up, all these different experiences. But I think maybe for many people, it may even be a first time that they've been having to potentially reach out and look for some of those resources. So thank you very much for sharing that this morning, Borni.
Kia ora, e wā, kia
Now
ora.
I'd like to introduce our second panellist for this morning, Shona McCullough. Shona is a New Zealand Arts Laureate and a creative entrepreneur whose career in the arts sector of Aotearoa has spanned over 35 years. As a dancer, choreographer, filmmaker, teacher, installation artist, artistic director, and arts manager, she's worked across the dance, theatre, education, film, and television sectors. Shona initiated the development of several arts businesses, including Human Garden Productions, the Human Garden Agency, which sourced and supplied work for New Zealand performers, and most recently, the New Zealand Dance Company, which she co-founded and was the chief executive and artistic director until March of this year, where she has recently taken up the role of artistic director at the Auckland Arts Festival. Shona is really passionate about elevating the respect for artists and supporting their health and well-being through best practice working conditions. Kia ora, Shona, welcome.
Tēnā koutou, talofa lava, greetings to you all. Ko Porongia te Maunga, ko Waikato te Awa, ko Bombay te Waka, ko Shona toku ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's really wonderful to be with you all here today, and I thought it would be really lovely to start with a shared breath together. Breathing is something that helps us all maintain our well-being. So let's close our eyes and just take a beautiful big inhalation together and exhale. Kia ora. So firstly, another big ngā mihi nui to PANNZ, to Auckland Live and Creative New Zealand for facilitating this amazing platform for us to share information and our ideas as we all navigate this sudden change that we're experiencing. Greetings and much respect to all the previous panellists who've been on these hui, and to my esteemed colleagues and friends today, Borni, Dolina and Renee. Also big ups to the behind the scenes team, Louise, Heather, Francis and Helena. Secondly, I just wanted to send my support to any of you who have been bereaved by lost loved ones or are facing hardship at this time. My thoughts are with you. So today, I just wanted to humbly share some of my thoughts. I've been thinking a lot as I transition from the New Zealand Dance Company, a company that used to rely on shared space to make our work, and sharing that in a live realm with our audiences, and transitioning on March the 10th to my new role at the Auckland Arts Festival, where I looked up and saw a slow motion tsunami devastate the festival and see 80 performances cancelled. However, what's utterly inspired me is how the sector has responded and people within it. I'm really, really amazed and inspired by their strength and resilience. And I'm also utterly inspired by our innate desire to connect and share our thinking and help each other. And I believe that we have the capability to create a better outcome for more artists and our sector if we work collectively and collaboratively in response to this situation, finding a shared sense of purpose rather than what sets us apart. So I want to talk about 4 things today, and I've made some notes, so forgive me for that. The first is change and what we might be experiencing during this seismic shift. The second thing I'd like to very briefly discuss is the difference between the response phase and the recovery phase of our actions in this crisis. Thirdly, to talk about disruption, and not just COVID, but what other disruptions this one is laid on top of. And finally, some thinking about how we might move towards a new mode of sustainability and new ways of approaching our work and the way our sector interrelates with each other. So starting with our experience of change, I wanted to share with you a model that many of you may be familiar with. It was developed originally by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, as a support mechanism for the stages of grief. But this one has been developed further to reflect the common patterns of behaviour during significant change for people and organisations. You might or might not find it helpful, but for me, it's been a great framework to just track where I am on this model. So Francis, if you could share this slide with everyone, that would be ka pai. So you'll see at the top of the change curve, right at the top is stability, and at the bottom is chaos. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the realms of productivity and morale and how they might be affected by the radical jump that we've just experienced, dropping between stability and chaos almost overnight. So the left top quadrant is described as status quo. And in this model, it's defined as comfort and control, meaning that there was an inherent order in our environment and our day-to-day activity, in our work and our home lives. This is our feet on familiar ground, stable ground. But I want to strongly acknowledge that for many, the status quo has meant varying levels of discomfort and dissatisfaction, and that the ground certainly wasn't stable or supportive. And I want to come back to that later. But the point of this part of the diagram is just to describe what we are at least familiar with experiencing. So dropping down to the left bottom quadrant is where we experience feelings in the face of change and discomfort of the unknown. We feel safe when we know and understand the world, and when we don't, we experience feelings such as fear, anger, guilt, grief, and for many people in our sector, immense pressure to solve the problem. Suddenly the world has shifted and our stomachs are churning, our pukus feel uneasy. And I know that many colleagues, particularly arts marketers, have had an incredibly tough time navigating the plethora of online content and how to strategize a new performance platform for organizations almost overnight. Also, there are individual artists who are extremely vulnerable at this time, perhaps on their own, or responsible for large whānau and worrying about what the future might bring. But this phase of change is Tukorehe. It's the void, the dark, where we can't see forward. But we know that out of this darkness, both birth and rebirth will emerge, and we will be able to see again. Swinging across to the third phase of change is where we begin to respond and look forward, even if our desire for certainty keeps us yearning back to what the parameters we knew were. This new phase sees us starting to wonder how we might behave in this new future with a sense of curiosity, experimentation, and discovery. So this is where we've witnessed this just incredible response from our sector, new creations every day that are filled with araha and kotahitanga, and already a truly increased sense of connectedness. Our sense of unity as a sector gives us real security, and our light begins to reactivate. We also start to imagine that this could be an opportunity for significant change, as many of the aspects of our interrelatedness were working for some, but certainly not all. Searches for answers posed by the change and the solutions we discover might start to become integrated into an emerging redefinition of our roles, functions, organisations, and behaviours. So right now, you might be swinging between phase 2 and 3, and this is completely normal, as are all of the feelings that accompany our experience as humans of change and uncertainty. So up to the top right-hand corner, phase 4, the new future is still completely uncertain. We're still at sea with fog around us. But I believe this is a time where there's a great opportunity for each of us to reimagine. And this leads me to share some thoughts about response and recovery, because this is where we lean forward together. Thanks, Francis. You can beam me back to full screen. I hope that model was helpful to some of you anyway. So the second point I wanted to talk about today was just defining the difference between the two phases of response, and then recovery. And I'd like to acknowledge here the incredibly swift action that our government and Creative New Zealand took to assuage immediate financial distress and provide surety in a short-term response plan. And we personally have been dealing with our own response plans with our whānau, our communities, and our vulnerable people in our bubbles and communities. As a sector, the number of cash flows that have been updated over the last 2 weeks is a very rapid and depressing number crunching exercise as arts managers try and provide evidence to their funders and boards of the impact of this crisis. But after the first response, we need to turn our attention to the recovery phase, and this is going to have short, medium, and long-term actions and outcomes. And given the uncertainty of the situation, even at 4 o'clock, if it is announced that we'll be moving to level 3, that really doesn't make a huge amount of difference for many of us. But this is a time to imagine and dream a variety of scenarios. And I've found the following quote, which actually emerged from the Christchurch earthquakes, really helpful to imagine this phase. And it says, "When the winds of change rage, don't build a shelter, build a windmill." And I really love this image of dancing with the air of change, and it gives me comfort and sees a sector that is fluid and responsive. And it's the only way we can be at present, as every day the situation is changing and there's so much that we can't control. But we can control how we behave and respond to these winds. My third offering is around disruption. And I think disruption brings out the best and the worst, the strengths and the weaknesses in us as individuals, as communities, organisations, and as countries. It acts as an amplifier of our leadership, our values, and our own thoughts, behaviours, and actions as artists and as citizens. Although really interestingly, there's a fundamental equality in the pandemic itself in that no one is immune. It utterly exposes and magnifies the existing inequalities in our communities and society. And I want to acknowledge that many people in our arts sector will have fundamental and vast differences in their experience at this time. But I really hope that the arts sector can be a powerful force to help create more equity in the way that we respond. The COVID disruption is not a single entity, however. It illuminates a series of highly obvious and more insidious disruptions that have been occurring over a long period of time. We've already been dealing with the disruptions of 3 concurrent revolutions, an ever-changing technological environment. I mean, when I began my work, there was no internet, and struggling to keep up with those changes. Secondly, environmental crisis due to the systemic abuse of our natural world. And thirdly, a radically shifting demographic and populations, and therefore audiences and languages and communication all over the world due to mass migration. And this has affected the arts sector significantly. Racism, capitalism, and colonisation are just 3 other distinct and shameful examples of disruptions. Capitalism has driven and rewarded individualism over community, profit over shared benefit, and artists have been shifted to the margins of society rather than held as central and valued as the revered prophets of truth and the unravellers of the mystery of life. And yet, we've often been led in our arts organisations to shoehorn these entities into business model guided by boards of business people who must know best. My 4th point is about a new sense of sustainability. I believe it's time we rebalanced many things in our sector and society and created more regenerative ways of being, which I prefer over the word sustainability, actually. Sustainability is an often used word, but without encapsulating the health of the entire sector, then it's not true sustainability. And without re-nourishing and regenerating our land, our people, and our art, nothing is sustainable. So I believe we need to create systemic change. Most of us want to be able to create transformative experiences for audiences and communities, but also respect our environment and be proud of the resource consumption required to produce them. We need to question and, I believe, reject where the money to produce our art comes from largely, which is the result of gambling, which hardly aligns with our core purpose of creating well-being and inspiration in people. We need to listen more carefully as a nation through the uplifting of our treasured artists as vital spokespersons of Aotearoa, whether speaking through their art or about their art. We need to rebalance the disproportionate domination of sport over art in our media and therefore society, and a shift from individual to collective, competitive to shared health, not us and them, but we. And this change can happen within all of us if we decide to. But I believe the arts sector has to lead this change itself, and see that it's necessary for true regeneration. We've been working far too hard for far too long, most of us, and valuing metrics of measurable data in terms of our reporting over human impact and transformation of lives. So this is a time where we can refashion the frameworks of our priorities and become a high-functioning ecosystem. We are all part of linked systems of humans and nature. And these are complex, adaptive systems where flexibility and resilience are key. One that embraces collective over competitive behaviour and upholds respectful and equitable treatment of our artists. One that sees every voice as valuable. Funding and success measures should no longer be data points, but instead inquisitively seeing how much truth, beauty, and meaning was created. So this is all easy to say and very hard to make these monumental shifts in our personal and societal behaviour. But this is already required by this crisis. And those of us that have a conscience about the well-being of others and the survival of all of us, it's necessary thinking. And I believe our sector fails as a whole if we are not actively engaged with the other ecosystems we work with in advancing our work together towards a healthy state together. So I'm personally really excited about this conversation and welcome your thoughts. None of these points are meant as a criticism at all of what has been, but a true opportunity to rethink and discuss how we would like our future to be. Neoliberalism is counter to regenerative thinking, and our Indigenous people have so much knowledge and regenerative practice and collective knowledge about health and well-being. So I would love us to take the complexity of this situation and refine it to a shared kaupapa as a sector, create powerful advocacy, and then this kaupapa will be what is amplified and multiplied powerfully and collectively like a tsunami of love. And I just want to leave you with a beautiful whakatauki that I think is important at this time. Waiho I te toipoto, kaua I te toiroa. Let us join together and not fall apart. Thank you for your time today. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Shona. Thank you very much for all those beautiful thoughts that you shared about systemic change, reimagining and rebalancing for our future, and the change chart, and just acknowledging that, as you said, all of us will be at different points of that response chart. So some of us may get to phase 4 before others in terms of that space to be able to redevelop and reimagine the future. And how can we ensure that we're bringing everyone's thoughts with us through to that, to reimagining the future together, like who, so that what you're saying, that there's not one particular group that's leading that change, that everyone is brought through so that we can manage those inequalities and inequities that we're seeing. Thank you. I'd like to just take a moment to share with you the name of the of the Facebook group that Borni was talking about before. Many of you may be on it, but if you have not heard of the Aotearoa Arts and Events during the COVID-19 crisis Facebook page, or AAE-C19-C, please do check it out. There's some wonderful resources on there, and also just thoughts and positive affirmations, people sharing their projects on that page. Borni's also just reminded me of another website which exists, musichelps.org.nz, which is offering free counselling sessions and wellbeing support. So please do check out their website, musichelps.org.nz. Shona, I'm looking forward to coming back to and discussing some of the ideas that you've raised in your kōrero just now. Please, if anybody out there has any thoughts they'd like to add or questions for any of our panelists, please do feel free to write in the comments. We'd love you to join our conversation. But of course, you do not have to. We're wonderful to have you here listening to us as well. I'd like to introduce our third panelist for this morning, Renee Liang. I do want to bring up her bio to share with you a little bit more about what Renee does. Renee, a second-generation Chinese Kiwi, is a poet, playwright, pediatrician, medical researcher, and essayist. She is the Asian theme lead and a named investigator on the landmark longitudinal study Growing Up in New Zealand. As an established writer, Renee has collaborated on visual arts work, film, opera, and music, produced and directed theatre works, worked as a dramaturg, taught creative writing, and organised community-based arts initiatives such as New Kiwi Women Write, which is a writing workshop series for migrant women, and The Kitchen, a program nurturing stories in local kitchens. Her work, The Bone Feeder, which was originally a play, was later adapted into an opera for the Auckland Arts Festival in 2017, and was one of the first Asian mainstream works to be performed in New Zealand. Renee has written, produced, and toured 8 plays with Sophia's Garden about to tour at this time of year. In 2018, she was appointed a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to the arts and won Next Woman of the Year for Arts and Culture. Kia ora, Renee, welcome.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you for having me. And I'd just like to add my thanks, as with all the other panelists, to PANNZ and Auckland Life for this amazing initiative, which I understand is just going to continue as part of our community building. I sit in a really unusual space, and it's been something that this particular crisis has been really has just highlighted for me. I've never really walked in the arts community as a medical practitioner before, but in this forum, I am probably wearing both my hats. For me, I'm one of the people that actually has become busier. And that's not just because of my of my increased roster and my increased clinical workload, which is true. There's been a lot of behind the work seen. So even though actually our clinical load has not increased because of actually what everybody is doing lockdown properly, there's been a lot of late nights and things, catching up with emails. I'm on probably about 10 different information streams, which are constantly having research articles. So the first thing I'd really like to do is update you on that. And then I'll move into talking about our response as arts practitioners, and how in some ways that the medical and the arts worlds can work together. So the first thing is that the New Zealand situation, obviously you guys have seen the charts. It's not a race, it's not a competition, but compared to the rest of the world, New Zealand's done good. And that, again, that's due to our leadership, but also due to our leadership. You know, we've actually listened. Our health literacy from the circles that I'm in is very high as New Zealanders. We're quite logical thinkers. We take scientific information on board and we process it. We also question, which is a really good thing to do. But I think it's a really great you know, I think it's a really good thing that New Zealanders have done. And no matter what the result is at 4 p.m. today, we will still, I think we still continue to do really well so long as we process all the information around and speak to each other and support each other. It's not easy to stay in lockdown. It's not easy to understand everything, but I think we're doing pretty well. In terms of our health capacity, as I alluded to, there's been a great capacity building in the health sector that probably has mostly gone under the radar for most people that aren't in it. But I can tell you, being in it, it's pretty massive, like literally building new hospital wards, new ICUs, or into existing spaces. Tents have gone up around North Shore Hospital where I work. My roster has doubled. Most of my roster is actually on-call capacity rather than actually having to be at work. And at the same time, we're changing the ways we work significantly, much like you guys in the arts sector. So I'm doing most of my clinics by teleconference and phone calls. And like arts practitioners, we're actually discovering that there are advantages to these new ways of working, new ways of connecting that are sometimes better than the old ways. It's also managed to pull the health system out of the dark ages. So we've actually had to stop faxing. We're the last industry to stop faxing. We don't have to use post to post prescriptions to pharmacies to get them filled during lockdown. That's kind of incredible because we've been pushing for that for like a decade. And suddenly it all happened. And hopefully we'll stop using Internet Explorer at some stage as well. We're also the last industry to use Internet Explorer as a browser. So, you know, so that's one, you know, that's a little bit, you know, of a quirky thing, but just to say that actually there's been heaps of capacity building. An update on treatments. So you guys, well, there's a lot of information out in the media, not all of it very believable, but I can say to you that actually there are a lot of treatments being trialled. Nothing works as well as good social distancing, hand washing, and appropriate personal mask use and protective use when it's required, which is usually not in the home situation. However, there is progress made on vaccines. I read an article last night. There's at least 30 different vaccine groups around the world that are working really hard. These are really established groups. However, vaccines are still about 12 to 18 months away, as you've been told in the media. So we're not relying on them anytime soon. Lockdown or this new situation is not going to end anytime soon, even if lockdown ends in New Zealand. I agree with everybody else that, you know, we are going to have to adapt, and that it's a really good opportunity to reevaluate the old ways of working anyway. I just want to move on into the future though, you know, looking at the longer term health outcomes. I mean, you know, the acute stuff, i.e. us not getting you know, not many of us getting infected, not many of us needing to go to hospital, that phase may end soon, I hope, fingers crossed, and not return. However, there is more stuff that we need to consider from the health angle, and of course this overlaps into the wider hauora angle as well. I'm just wondering if we could just put up the graphic now that I supplied, and I'll just get it up on my other screen as well so I can look at it. So if that is up on your screen, you'll be able to see that first purple line, you know, we've hopefully on that downward trail now. So we don't have a huge amount of immediate mortality and morbidity. However, the second wave is just about to start. So when lockdown lifts, we in the medical field are bracing, because we're actually currently 40% down on hospital admissions, and clinics actually have ground to a halt, which means that all the stuff that's happening in the background we actually just can't see. It's not that it's not happening, it's just not, we can't see it, and we're really worried about it sort of slowly brewing in the background. So that's the immediate health stuff, like the body stuff, you know, the kids that are maybe not growing because they're not eating, or that kind of stuff. There's also the impact on all the families, you know, so the families that are trying to deal with these children or older people or chronic illness people at home. As soon as that immediate adrenaline rush of having to, deal with crisis goes away, we're going to collapse and have to deal with, having to deal with all the stuff that's been brewing in the background. Then you have the third wave, and that's the impact of interrupted care on chronic conditions. So these are all the people that ordinarily have quite high health needs that have maybe not tried really hard not to bother the health services because they think that we're going to be busy. And again, we've been trying really, really hard not to encourage these people not to avoid hospital, but of course there is the fear of coming to hospital, and I think that's what you're seeing with people not coming, not presenting, even if they've got chest pain and that kind of thing. And certainly we've had lots of anecdotal evidence of this, and then people essentially showing up much later, much further down the track, when it actually requires a lot more to get them well. But then it's the fourth wave that I really, really want to talk to. So the fourth wave, which you see as the red line, is the wave that will start to affect all of us, and which I think in some of you in your bubbles already, you're starting to feel the effects of, or start to feel that it's coming up behind you. And that's that, the mental illness, the trauma, so PTSD, that stuff, that's going to happen. Not for everybody, obviously, but this is what we saw in Christchurch. Christchurch was actually fine in the hospital sense. I worked in Christchurch about 6 months after the second earthquake, and it was strangely very relatively serene experience to work there. But then 2 or 3 years later, that's when you're going to start to see the kids with the behavioural disorders and so on. And I think we're going to see that too. We're going to see the adults and the children who are vulnerable being affected, and the rest of us are going to have to support them. And of course, there's the economic injury and the burnout that we've already dealt with in other hui and other discussions as well, which all of us are way too aware of already. So that is, that's a very, very pessimistic thing, which is why I want to move on to looking at solutions, because as an arts community, we are a very solutions focused discipline. So we'll just take that off the screen now, and I'll just move back to talking about what I see are the similarities between the arts sector response and the health sector response. So as arts practitioners, we are change makers. We are supremely adaptable because we have to be. We have to be very flexible. We have to roll with it. And this is what I've seen of my medical peers as well. Again, due to training. Our training is basically an apprenticeship, just like the arts model. And so we basically learn how to pick up skills really fast, to adapt, and really, really just to jump in and work out while paddling what we're going to do next. And to go on to, to when Shona was sharing her beautiful allegory with us about when the winds of change blow, build a windmill, I was actually thinking, well, you could build a windmill, or you could learn how to grow wings. And that's what we're going to have to do, I think. And the people that learn how to grow wings, whatever shape or form they are, they're going to be able to move out of this better than other people. And perhaps they're going to be able to lift other people up with them as well, which I really hope we will be able to. There is obviously going to be a lot of fear, a lot of reaction, and Borni has already highlighted that there are many resources to help us through. But for us, there's also lots of opportunities. So we currently, the boundaries are being broken wide open. I'm seeing arts practitioners making flowering not only in the arts space, but actually into the health space. So we have a number of arts practitioners that have moved the arts practice into supporting their own communities, whether that be within the Pacific or Māori or Asian communities, or just the general community. And that can be in the form of giving further information, finding ways of translating that important health information into a manner that can be absorbed by their specific audiences. And that's all of our arts practice coming to play: understanding of audiences, understanding of communication. or it can really just be about responding. So those, Chris Parker's Instagram feed, Sarah Lang's comics are just a couple of examples I've seen, and those uplift people every day, but they're also an amazing record and response, and deeply, deeply personal. And I think it's just, I think these are ways that we as arts and as an arts community are already responding. I wanted to look at to talk about the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model as well that Shona shared. And just to point out, I agree with everything she said, just to point out that actually the Kubler-Ross model, you actually move back and forth between the stages. So it's not just one journey through, you're always moving back and forth between all the journeys. And in fact, the spaces that we come to in that journey will look different for each of us because we're all individual and we all come with a different background. So just to say, don't worry if somebody, agree with everybody that's spoken so far. Don't worry if your space looks different to the person who's standing next to you. That's okay. That's normal. This is how we work. This is human. I also wanted to agree about this is an opportunity for disruption or to adapt, and going back to the breaking open of new boundaries and bleeding into new worlds. I think that this is a really great opportunity to challenge existing models, but also as arts practitioners, we have quite a lot of power to try to embed or strengthen the new models. And there's this, again, I'm full of metaphors, but if you have midwife bringing a new life into the world, as arts practitioners, we are midwives, not only bringing a new model or a new way of thinking into the world with our hands and our voices and our bodies, but actually that whole feeling of that whole wealth of experience and understanding and training, just like midwives have. We're professionals. We know how to shape a story, define a theme, make things clear, and we have a role to play in this new ecosystem. And in some ways, I guess our challenge is, how do we get that to be valued? How do we get our role to be recognized? Because it is a very strong role, but traditionally, of course, in the last, through the disruptions that Shona has mentioned, we have been devalued. And so how do we become as respected as the medical practitioners are right now? Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm really happy to take questions about any kind of medical things, but also, I mean, I'm not, so just to be very clear, I'm a pediatrician. I'm not an infectious diseases or a public health person. I've been reading a lot of stuff. So there's probably stuff I've read that I might be able to kind of point you to, but I'm not able to give any sort of really distinct information on the public health stuff. And if anybody wants to ask anything else, I'm more than happy.
Kia ora, Renee. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your expertise as well around the health sector. We've had some comments come in from people. It's really helpful to share the health hauora perspectives and think about both the impact for arts and the role the arts can play to support mental health and well-being. Someone else has commented that yes, health and arts are so integrally interrelated, and made a note that this was a key discussion and research point at the Edinburgh Cultural Summit the year before last. Also mentioning that our technological advancements could also further the potential. I think we'll all be keeping our eye out for the fourth wave, Renee. Thank you for sharing that too. I'm not sure if any of us had necessarily been thinking about the longer term impact, say 2 or 3 years down the track. And I think you're right, we've probably got a lot to learn from the Christchurch situation as well. And Shona, you spoke about that also. And again, Renee, being solutions focused, thinking about opportunities, how we might challenge these existing models and strengthen these new models in new ways. And this brings me to a question that's come through. on the document here, wondering if the panel could please discuss how we might change the prove yourself model to access funding and enable risk-taking. Do you have any action points or suggestions how we could step away from data points and capitalist frameworks? Shona, I might come to you first because you talked about this in your kōrero this morning.
Yeah, good question. I mean, really, we're talking about attitudinal change towards artists, and a swing away from. I mean, the sort of obsession with data comes from capitalist structures, but really, it's about placing trust in our artists. I mean, no one works in the arts sector that I know, to make money. We're actually doing it because we're passionate and we vehemently believe in the power of the arts as essential to human well-being. And so I just think we need to be having conversations with our funders about how we can recalibrate the amount of time that we're all spending measuring that data and reporting on it. I actually think we could be spending our time better by working more closely with our communities and the health sector, for example. So I just think we need to kind of re-swing the weight that's played on numerical measurement. I often talk about, it's easy to measure the width of something, but what about the depth of an impact on a human being, the heart depth? How do we measure that? We can't, but we can tell stories to our funders. We can have singular examples of how this experience has impacted a young person positively and perhaps veered them away from a path of destruction to one of, real constructive contribution to society. I think we have to absolutely, and I hate to use the word institutionalize, but I think in this context, it's good to institutionalize innovation, that innovative thinking should be at the heart and the most respected part of what we do as a sector. It often, I feel that the brand Aotearoa relies so heavily on our creativity, and yet that respect is not always offered to the sector as a whole and artists as individuals. So, it is a recalibration of the way that our sector leaders across not just the arts but the other economies view artists. I want to get rid of those old conversations about being ditzy, artists being ditzy and kind of flaky people. It's I don't know anyone in the sector that's flaky or ditzy, quite frankly.
Thanks, Shona. Borni or Renee, do either of you have any thoughts about that? How we might change the model so we can move away from the proving yourself model so we can have more innovation and more risk-taking? Borni?
Kia ora, Anian. I think for me, just listening to those kōrero, and first off, thank you, Renee and Shona. That was amazing to just sit back and listen to as well. But in regards to this kōrero, I think one of the things we need to step back and take a look at is fundamentally the art space is built on a colonized systemic theoretical space. So every time that we are putting our hearts and souls as artists into a place where we are trying to get people to understand what we're doing, to give us pūtea and to help support the art that we're doing, I feel quite off. There's the barrier there automatically because we have shifted and we continuously shift. So going back to these models that our other panelists were talking about, it talks about those different phases that we move through. And that's not just for what we're doing, what's happening for us at the moment. That's consistently what happens with us our whole lives. This is just a different framework within it. We're constantly having to renegotiate what we're doing as we exist because we don't know what's going to happen from day to day. And I think what's happened is we shift, we move as artists, as administrators within the art space. Our brains change, our arts change we move with our whakaaro, we move with how the world is changing around us. But I think these systemic spaces still sit within a really strong core structure of colonization. And I think for us to be able to first answer that question is to dismantle what that looks like first. So within that dismantling, what's actually working? Because there must be stuff that's working, but what isn't? And what isn't within that systemic space, what can we do to address those things specifically? So when we're talking to our funders, when we're talking to those people who we expect to support us and do not, what is it that we can do as a unit and say to them, well, this is not working for us as a whole landscape. How is that not something we can't address if it's affecting us all? That's my whakaaro.
Kia ora, Borni. I think that's really interesting. Shona, as well, you spoke about Indigenous approaches to well-being or climate change or these other systems of knowledge that could help at this time in terms of building a new future, which brings across more of those values, particularly values around collective well-being and manaaki, working together into our art spaces in terms of changing or dismantling the system. Renee, do you have any thoughts to share?
Yes, I want to agree with Borni that we need to reassess how we work and even how we view our role as arts practitioners and our role in the wider ecosystem. I was actually, when Borni was talking about the old, the colonization of the ways that we present our arts, I was thinking, yes, this is definitely something we need to think about, reflecting back on my own understanding of, for example, in China, the artists previously have not been in that whole, rehearsal, presentation, and then reevaluation model that they work in the old style with the theatrical troupes going out, where they have stories that everybody knows that they just retell, but for the new, to reflect the news of the day, the politics of the day, as a conversation, because there's no, it's basic, it's kind of Shakespearean. There's no fourth wall. They're there, everybody talks to them, they talk back, and it's that traditional conversational model. And I'm not saying that this is the only model, but I'm saying that perhaps we need to think about our role as practitioners. Always we're a part, we make a product and we present it for money. Maybe that has to change, because other professions don't have that model. Other professions have a more look at ministers, look at doctors, how they work as more of a reflective conversational kind of way of working. And perhaps it was one role that we have to reclaim that we actually had in the past. I think that I read this beautiful article, which some of you may already have read as well, which is, I think it was called The Forgotten Art of Assembly. And I really remembered, and that was a very poetic essay by someone about how actually performance is about being together in a space, and it's about collectivism, and how do we make use of this opportunity now to redefine what that means, because it isn't, again, it's not just about someone making a thing and then putting it in front of a crowd of people who have come together to watch it. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe we can use technology, maybe we can use other ways to disrupt and change, to do this thing that we know has great value to collect together and to experience together, but how else can we deliver it? I think also it's really important to look at our own structures and hierarchy within our arts practice. I think that there's been the capitalism and other structures have put pressure on our system to structure itself in a really relatively strict hierarchy, I think. Both things that are funded, not funded, organisations that have resources versus other organisations or individuals that don't have resources, people who have awards, people that don't have awards. And I don't know that that's particularly useful. I think we need to keep the structures that work and relook at the structures that don't work and make sure that we look at it through an equity lens. And also just be aware that we can use all our skill sets. So I was also reflecting that as a medical practitioner, I use my art skill sets every day, just like in my arts practice, I use my medical skill sets every day. There's no them. And I think that as arts practitioners, we have to be aware that our skill sets of communication, adaptability, and flexibility and creativity are valid in so many different fields, and we don't necessarily need to stick to our field. And that brings me to my final point, which is how do we get people to recognise our skill set? How do we change attitudes towards artists? And I think part of it is about trying to go through those barriers again. You know, I think that the barriers have been dissolved in this very unusual time. It's a good opportunity for us to go out and start and talk to other people and be not just artist with a capital A, but a person who's using all their skills. And perhaps that is one way for people to realise what our skills are and to value us. So.
Hello, Renee. I'd just like to share, someone has shared a book called Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman, which speaks to these ideas really eloquently. So I suggest that if anyone wants to go and check out that book, Utopia for Realists. Someone else has just made a request over here that perhaps a transcript of what people have really responded to what you said earlier today, Shona. So we're just wondering if there will be someone who can transcribe this, perhaps with PANNZ, and we could put it on the website or pass on to the Inquirer. So yes, we will be able to do that. In fact, also this hui this morning is being recorded so that people can also access and watch later and hear from what the panelists have offered this morning. We don't have any other questions at the moment, but I've got a question for each of you, which is just around what will your next steps be in this phase as where do you feel that you are on the chart, and what are your next steps? We'll start with you, Borni.
Kia ora. Yeah, I think like everyone else, it's a big negotiation, a daily negotiation, but part of going back to what Renee was speaking about, using the different tools that we bring to how we're existing in the moment. I'm lucky enough to have a few strings to my bow, and one of those, obviously what we're talking around, is I took myself into the mental health sector because I wanted to have a better understanding of how we could look after the foundations of our art space. So I've got that, and for me, part of my forecasting forward is to look at how I can use those tools with a little bit more strength. And that's kind of, like I mentioned earlier, part of what I felt my function was as this started to unfold was to navigate our social media space. As soon as we were locked down, we were all artists that, as artists, we were stripped really quickly of what we were used to, which was our face-to-face and our connectivity. And that's really scary because all of a sudden, one day you wake up and it's not there any longer. And so I felt part of my function was to navigate that, and with the tools that I have, and just to let everyone know, I'm not a counsellor. I don't have qualifications in those areas, but I worked in the mental health space, and I've aligned myself with these organisations for the last 8 years, so I can gain the knowledge. At the top of today, Dolina spoke about the Health Promotions Agency as part of my the stuff that I do. And the Health Promotion Agency has a national Māori advisory mental health rōpū, and I'm on that. So I've been sitting on that for the last 2 years. So I do have a really good network of people and understanding of where we can find the right and correct knowledge for us. This is slightly off topic, but not. I'll come back to our topic. But one of the things I did notice at the very beginning, we're constantly talking about change. We're constantly talking about how we as individuals, and I agree, you know, it's okay to negotiate and navigate how you're existing in this moment, the way that you are. We shouldn't put judgment on ourselves because someone else is seemingly doing better, seemingly more productive. How we are navigating and how we're able to communicate is okay. I think one of the things we don't look at, though, is to understand, you know, we speak about this word, this phrase, the status quo. That means completely different things, I think, for everybody. And it also means different things from a cultural perspective. I spoke earlier about, you know, the feeling that we need to look at what decolonizing infrastructures and that systemic spaces, and status quo is another space as well we need to look at, because as Māori, I believe for us in Aotearoa, and I can't speak for all Māori, but the status quo, the normal is Māori, is te ao Māori, mātauranga Māori, tikanga. So with that being our status quo, this is where we come back for our normal, which is manaakitanga, whakawhanaungatanga, being with whānau. If you're from an Asian community, your status quo will be slightly different to ours. We will have, there's relationship there, obviously. So I think when we're forecasting each of us moving forward, and if we're looking at what unification can look like, we need to be aware that we need to unify, most definitely. But we have to be aware that our status quo isn't the same as everybody else's. And that while we're looking at unifying, we can't blur those lines. Because what's really important for me from my whakapapa and from my whānau is important to be kept in the strength that it is. So that's my little spiel before I talk about where I'm going. Part of what I'm forecasting for myself is very, very much enmeshed in the hauora space. At the moment, I'm researching how to create a national resource, hauora resource for the arts sector, so that it will eventually roll out to be online, but also it will be in 4 phases. So I'm going to be looking at funding for that. And what I mean a national resource is so that it's for our sector wide. So we have a really strong core grounded in the processes and of tikanga. And so I've got advice to be able to create that space, but so that it can have streams that connects to all of our whānau in the arts. So fine arts, dance, across the board. So I'm in the middle of looking at what we can do to create that. I went to, so I have a little bit of background in that. I created a resource for Play Market last year. We're based in that hauora space. And I've just written an academic piece with the University of Auckland because I started doing my master's in social education and looking at what applied theatre and community and connectivity can do to help create third spaces so we have a better understanding of forward trajectories. So I'm using that to look at how we can create something for ourselves. The other thing I'm doing as well is I'm really trying to figure out what my normal is in this space. And I think part of what my normal is to not delve into too much social media, because there is a hell of a lot of foolishness going on in social media, and I don't want my head to be done in so much. So I'm stepping back and focusing on my mahi. I have a festival called Atawhai, which is based in Hauora as well. And this year we were meant to be delivering actually at the end of next month. We're rolling that out a little bit longer, which is cool. But it's rangatahi focused and rangatahi led. So I'm looking at what we can do to create a space if it needs to be online, that's kind of cool because we'll be able to connect a lot more, a little bit further into our rural spaces. So I feel I'm quite busy, and I'm lucky because I have a really strong whānau and a really strong theatre whānau with the Pau Theatre with Amber and my brother Tainui. So I have a constant where I've got connectivity that helps me to realign and sit in my own authenticity and truth.
Kia ora, Borni. Thank you very
Kia ora.
much. We look forward to seeing what you do with the Atawhai Festival in this new space. And also wonderful to hear about the new resources you're working on in the whole water space. We'll definitely keep an eye on that mahi. For any of you who haven't seen, please do go and check out the Play Market resource that Borni was referring to. That's really fantastic resource to have on hand. Also was really drawn to what you were saying, Borni, about the unification. And he waka eke noa tātou, engari. However, our needs are all different and we still need to maintain our own sovereignty over our own spaces and ways of being whilst coming together.
Aye.
Fiona, over to you. I'd like to ask you what you feel your next steps are within this framework, but also a question's come in here about how leadership might be redefined as we navigate new models. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
So the mahi I'm doing at the moment is sort of threefold, really. First, supporting others and offering what I can humbly to help other people that are struggling with navigating or organisations. Secondly, I'm very focused on learning at the moment, and I think that it's an important part of our process as we do navigate change to be open to fresh thinking and fresh ideas, and so that we're opening those windows and listening and doing as much listening as I can. I really have enjoyed being on the COVID learning lunches and meeting new people. I've really I really think one of the best things that's come out of this is new connections and new connectivity through these hui. In my role at the festival, obviously, it completely turned upside down, but looking for me at the role of how the festival could support and nourish and resuscitate many of the projects that may have fallen over this period. So very soon there'll be a call out to the sector for ideas and proposals for the 21 to 24 period, because I'm also very interested in providing nourishing conditions for the creation of work over longer periods of time as well. So in terms of leadership, that's I have been thinking about that a lot, and I think one of the things I'm very interested in is intergenerational leadership. And I think we've fallen into some patterns where perhaps in some organisations, or even, in our funding organisations, that you reach a certain level and then you become, a leader. Well, I believe that leaders are all around us, and our young people actually have a very, very important voice, or multiplicity of voices at the moment. So I'm really interested in a shared leadership model, and encouraging new ways of thinking about it not being hierarchical. I mean, I've never felt like that myself. I've always preferred the idea of a circular model where the art is at the centre and the artists are at the centre, and that everything else is supporting around like ripples in a pool. So I'm very interested in the idea of bringing younger people onto boards, if boards are even still an entity that is necessary. I mean, boards have really been created because of legal structures, because of trust funding. So I'd love to have some conversations with people about, well, actually, do we really need to have those kinds of structures? So I think this is an exciting time for us to work together as leadership groups and work with representatives from different groups of people, and I totally support the discussions, Borni, Dolina and Renee, around that we all have our own microcosms that have very distinct needs and viewpoints, and we need to find a way to empower and support all of those voices to arrive at a shared purpose.
Kia ora, Shona. Yeah, I think we've got lots of work to do, haven't we? Because on one hand, those boards and those kind of structures are working furiously to stabilise the industry and stabilise organisations so that arts can continue, so we can continue to employ people. But at the same time as stabilising, we're wanting to really like rip it open and explore some new ways of being and new ideas. Renee, I'll come over to you about what are your next steps and what are your thoughts on what the other panelists have shared?
Yeah, so I have to say I'm going round and round that Kubler-Ross model hard out. I had the first weekend of lockdown, I had this crazy thing where I was doing a 48-hour call at hospital, but at the same time I was helping someone set up a new NGO, and I was pulling in arts practitioners to help us, and also I was working on a new play and all this stuff, and then it sort of all kind of like fell. It didn't fall over. I just kind of ran out of puff, and I think this is a thing that is normal. I listened to, I don't know if you guys listened to Neil Gaiman's interview on Radio New Zealand yesterday, but he said, oh yes, me and Amanda Palmer have only worked out that we only have 45 minutes per day to work on our stuff because we're looking after a 4-year-old. And I feel exactly this, I feel relieved that it's having issues because I have massive issues. The play is a really weird thing. I got commissioned to write a play with my first international commission because it's a post-apocalyptic play. It was actually commissioned essentially because of the Australian bushfires before COVID. But then I'm having trouble keeping up and making it fiction at the moment because it's definitely events are happening much faster. So I'm in this very strange creative space. I'm in my very scary day-to-day clinical space where I have to go to mask fittings to make sure that I'm wearing my N95 mask properly, and at the moment there is actually no N95 mask that fits my face, so there's all that sort of concern as well about that. And then I've got my kids, they started school, and I'm at home with them, and I want to use the opportunity to kind of be with my family because in some ways it's an amazing opportunity as well, but there's that guilt and that needing to hide away to work and then needing to be out there with your family and needing to bake. I think that it's a really, I kind of am sharing it just to say that I think it's okay to kind of be flippy floppy and not really know where you are at the moment, because I think it's kind of normal for everybody. And even that people seem to be really together and have stuff to do probably aren't. They're probably just like showing a good face at the moment, putting nice hot cross bun photos on Facebook or something, I don't know. But in terms of moving on to the question about leadership, I completely agree with Shona and Borni about we need to flip the system. We need to look at what works, keep that, and then change what doesn't work. And that decolonisation and the equity model, making sure that the voices that aren't normally heard, that it's a change, it's a continuation of the conversations that we've been having for years. But this is a really good opportunity because the existing system is currently destabilized. So it's a really good opportunity in some ways to try and test out new models and see what works and try and grow them up beyond up between the rafters in some ways. I love that shared leadership model as well. I think that in some ways in the spaces that I'm working in, we've already been testing it out, and I think there are some great learnings that we can share in this time. The other opportunity which I want to acknowledge is that because of the new ways that we're working, there are so many, it's almost like our international boundaries we can't get on a plane, but we can just jump to somewhere else in the space of a moment. So, I mean, this new commission that I'm working on, we're planning on doing the entire development of it online, because I can't go to Australia for it. So we have to do, we're apparently we are doing a development workshop next week. And I'll be able to do that from here. And it's really exciting, because like, why didn't we do this before? Like, we could have done this before. And I know that the previous PANNZ Hui that we had a lot of really great discussion about this was change that was coming anyway, because of climate change, because of the way that we can't actually countenance this increased use of resources anymore. So why can't we have to show leadership now in how we change our whole practice, and not just because of COVID, which is a threat that will eventually fade. We will forget about this. We will move on to another crisis. But the ways that we are working, hopefully we can establish the good ways.
Kia ora, Renee. Thank you. Yes, change is needed and has been needed. And you're right, some of those conversations that we have been having for years. And so how can we find ways to really listen to each other at this time, so that we can make the changes that we all want to make? I've got another question in here just about audience development in terms of hauora, particularly in the regions. So this idea of taking care of people in the regions in regards to hauora, and how do we keep maintaining our relationship with our audiences? Does anybody have any thoughts on this question? Maybe I'll shoot to you, Borni.
Cool.
Maintain relationship with our audiences, or develop audiences, particularly in regards to hauora and taking care of people.
To be honest, I'm not really sure what the question is asking, because if it's around, at the moment, if we're looking at how do we create pieces and look after our artists, the only way we can do that, well, the strongest way we can do that at the moment, I think, is with what's happening in initiatives like this and the Facebook pages we spoke about, is around that unity, so that we can have connectivity and the conversations are working, and they're live. And I think in that respect, hauora is about really understanding what you have control of in the moment, and what are you able to do in the areas that you are able to feel safe. And that safety comes from what are you able to, what control can you have in your bubble, in your space. And then past that, so it's looking after self so that you can look after other. If it's around looking after audiences in this particular space, I don't really know, to be honest, because our connectivity to the wider world is via this space. And I think there's a difficulty in that, in us looking after our audiences. We have specific audiences, like people are creating content online, and if they want to make sure that their people are okay when they're receiving their gifts, when they're receiving their video content and stuff like that, I don't think it changes. I don't think just because we're online that if you're mindful of holding spaces and looking after people, it doesn't change just because we have an online presence as opposed to an in front of each other presence. We're still all humans, and we will still connect the same way. This is just a slight different barrier, but respect, looking after, being respectful, being clear on what it is you're doing, because as in theatre and live space, we don't want to diminish people's work and tell them what they can and can't do. But if you're able to let people know what it is exactly that you're doing, that's being respectful to other people. So you're being able to let them know before they make the decision to engage. Yeah, I guess that's how I would answer that question.
Kia ora, thank you, Borni. Do you have any thoughts on that? How we're taking care of it's not specific about whether it's talking about the whole order of artists or of audiences, but how do we continue to engage and look after both?
I wondered if it was a question about when we move back to a shared space again. I'm aware that there's going to be real nervousness for many of our audience members, particularly the elderly, about coming back into public spaces. So I think a lot of thought and care is going to need to happen in terms of first of all, strategizing, what's the new shared space model going to look like? And then a whole communication strategy around how to reassure people and explain very carefully about what perhaps the venue or the artist or the performing arts company is doing in the way that they consider their safety. So in terms of the other work that we all need to do, it's like if we've got these 4 levels that Jacinda has created for us, we need to have a kind of response plan to each of those levels, including level 0, which is back to normal, but we're not going back to normal. It isn't, and I am actually over the new normal as a statement, but just really thinking about, well, how are we going to reassure and re-encourage people that it's safe to re-enter a shared audience space?
Renee, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think the original question was about regional stuff, and I hope that we will have a panel later that will actually have some regional panelists to comment on that, because I don't feel I have massive expertise. But I wanted to acknowledge that actually how people have access technology, for example, is really different depending on where they live and what communities they're in, and not only that, how they interpret communications. But I also wanted to say that actually these communities, even if they don't have, say, great internet capacity, have richness in other ways. I was thinking about the time that I had a play reading in Rawene, and I was just told, oh, don't worry, they'll come, they'll know. And it was just the grapevine. There were no posters put up, no emailing around. But that's, that the audience development in those areas is different. And in some ways, the people that are on the ground working with those communities already know that. And they're usually the best placed people to advise on how we reach and how to engage and develop those communities. There's so much richness. I mean, I'm part of the Northland Arts COVID lockdown group, so shout out to those guys if you're listening. But they've been going so hard out. I think there's probably about 30 creative projects that are being updated daily on that at the moment, and people are sharing stuff. So that flowering of creativity is happening everywhere, but in really different forms. And I think that in some ways, our role is really just to watch it and nurture it where we can, but also just learn from it, because I think there's so much we can learn as well.
Thanks, Renee. And that's bringing us to a close of our online hui today. I want to say a huge thank you to Shona, Borni and Renee for the thoughts that you've shared today. It's been a really wonderful conversation. There are a couple of questions that we haven't got to on here, but I think that we will address those in future panels. There was a question around how is the Ministry of Arts and Culture working with other ministries, as we were having that conversation about the wider ecology. And also, yes, I think it's a great idea to have I'm sure that's on the plans here at PANNZ and Auckland Live, to have a panel where we're talking to people from the regions, and it will be wonderful to hear more about projects such as the Northland COVID-19 arts group that you're talking about, Renee, and the flowering of creativity that's happening across the country and across the motu. So thank you again to all of you who've joined us here. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone at Auckland Live and PANNZ behind the scenes here, Francis, Louise, Helena, and Heather. And I would also like to remind you that we will be continuing with this online hui series. Next Monday, the 27th, is actually a public holiday in recognition of Anzac Day. So we will update you on the Facebook and the PANNZ website as to when the next online hui will be taking place. And I'll just say karakia to close our session today, and sending aroha out to our panelists and also out to all of you who have joined us here for the online hui today. It's wonderful to share this space with you. Me inoi tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, kia tere te kairohirohi I mua I tō huarahi. Mauri ora kia tātou katoa, kia haumaru tonohu, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you again soon. Ngā mihi.